Do you want to make your own podcast? Spotify has a platform that lets you make one super easily, then distribute it everywhere and even earn money all in one place for free. It's called Spotify for Podcasters. And this is the platform that I use because it makes it so simple to record and distribute your podcast all in one place using your cell phone. What you need to do is download the Spotify for Podcasters app or go to www.spotify.com/podcasters to get started. Hello, my name is Catherine Moore, social worker, mom, coffee lover, and founder of Social Workers Rise, where we inspire social workers to connect, expand their knowledge, and change more lives than they ever thought possible. I'm so excited you found my podcast. We will talk everything social work on every level from micro to macro. We will hear the stories of social workers who are doing big things, learn new skills, and most importantly, give you actionable steps to make a difference today. Let's go. So last week we hit a milestone with Social Workers Rise podcast, and I'm so excited. We had 1,000 listens total to all of the shows combined. I'm so excited. Thank you so much for being here. I wanted to share one of the really great reviews that was left last week on Tuesday by Sue, LCSW. She says, valuable topics for those in the helping profession. I have been working in the social work profession for several years, and I'm always looking to expand and increase my knowledge. Social Workers Rise is a refreshing approach to learn from various social workers with expertise in their specific field. As a mom and social worker herself, the host, Catherine, discusses relevant topics that face social workers in today's day and age with her unique perspective in addition to her many guests. The topics discussed also have a multitude of applications and are not limited to just social workers only, such as parents and any other workers in various helping professions. Social Workers Rise is a must listen. Thank you so much, Sue. That really makes my heart happy. I really appreciate your feedback and your review. And for those of you who listen on iTunes, open your app, and you will see where to rate the podcast. When you open it up, you tap to rate, give it 5 stars, and then write me a short little note about what you love, how it's helpful, if you have a favorite topic or a guest or something that you learned, really anything. This just helps us be more easy to find in the iTunes repertoire of a gazillion podcasts. So I really appreciate you, and do that. I will read it on the air, and personally, thank you from the bottom of my heart. Thank you. Thank you, Sue. I really appreciate you. Before we hop into this amazing episode, I wanted to take a moment to be transparent with you and explain what Social Workers Rise is and where we're going. So Social Workers Rise is more than a podcast. My vision is to create a social worker family, a place and a community where we as social workers can feel supported, empowered, and equipped to do all of the jobs that we need to do. And it's going to be continually evolving as times evolve. So this was born out of an emotion that I had. I felt lonely in the field, that I didn't really have very many places to go. I didn't really have too many people to look up to as mentors and to be able to ask questions. And I didn't know where to go to find that one-on-one connection with people that I really needed to ask questions, to express how I felt, to voice my frustrations, and to even have that feedback like, hey, Catherine, I think you need to take a break. You really seem kind of burnt out right now. Like maybe you should just, reevaluate, is this job worth it? So just to have that sounding board and that really strong community of support. So that is what I envision for Social Workers Rise. And the way that we're doing that is one, through this podcast, and two, we're going to be offering ongoing learning and virtual training opportunities and a way to create a community. So with that, we're having our really first big course series coming up for you if you are a person who is striving to be a therapist. You are likely thinking about getting your license to provide clinical therapy. You may be already doing one-on-one clinical therapy, but don't really feel very confident in your skills and really want a stronger skill set. And also for new roles, new graduates who are entering these roles who are you have the basics, but you really just need to tie it in all together and essentially learn how to take the client through the therapeutic process. So this 5-course series is actually called Clinical Essentials for the Future Therapist. And this is going to be launching this summer. I'm very excited, and I hope that you are too if you are considering um, just getting stronger in your clinical skills. This was made for you, and we are still developing it right now. So please feel free to reach out for me. I have a VIP list, a list for very interested professionals. And if you would like to get on that VIP list to be the first to know when registration opens for this event, then shoot me an email, slide up in my DMs at Social Workers Rise on Instagram. Let me know that you're interested, and I would be happy to add you to that VIP list. So for now, let's hop into this episode and get started.
Hello.
Hi, Titi.
Hi, how are you?
I am really great. Thank you so much. I'm so excited to have you on our podcast, Social Workers Rise. So, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me. I'm very excited.
Yes, me too. So, we're in interesting times right now, and we had originally talked about doing a show on imposter syndrome. So, but it'll be interesting to be able to talk about imposter syndrome in light of kind of what's going on in the world right now. But before we jump into that, I I first want you to just tell us a little bit about yourself, like what you're doing right now, and how did you get into social work, and can you tell your full name because it is beautiful, but I always butcher it.
Oh, of course. Sure. So my full name is Chinonye Donna Egbulem. I am Nigerian American, and yeah, so I'm currently based in Raleigh, North Carolina. How did I get into social work? I love that question. So, first off, I should start off by saying that I am a public health social worker. So, I actually, when I was enrolled in my MSW program, I also was concurrently enrolled in an NPH program, and I was conferred 2 degrees at the same time, a master's degree in public health and a master's degree in social work. And what ultimately led me or inspired me to pursue both of these degrees at the same time was just the complementary nature of it. So I had, after undergrad, I always knew that I wanted to be in a very global space and be engaged in international global health work. So I joined the Peace Corps. I worked as a community health worker. And I will say that for me, uh, I always knew that I was going to be involved in healthcare. I mean, I had worked in nursing homes, I had worked with social workers within those spaces, and I'm a people person. So, in as much as I love to address, the health needs, ensure that the health status of a community, is up to par, and is in great condition, I also realize that we are human beings first, and there are so many social factors that ultimately play a large role in determining whether or not we can be the best versions of ourselves. So I was in Peace Corps, and one day, uh, in my village, in my tiny little village, my house. I was fortunate enough that my house was on the same grounds as the healthcare center, and so I woke up to a very large. There was just so much wailing, so much noise, and so the maternity ward was right behind my house. I came outside and I like quickly ran over there. And I just like, what was that noise? What is going on? So then I quickly learned that a mother had just lost her child.
Oh,
It was really sad. And she was crying, she was mourning the loss of her child. So there's that whole the grief part. But me being the investigator that I am, I'm like, well, how did this happen? What happened? What was the cause? That's when they told me that the child had malaria. Okay, the child had malaria. When did they realize this? What was going on? They're like, oh well, because the child was a girl, for some reason, unfortunately and sadly, girls aren't valued as much as boys are. So had that child been a boy, immediately as soon as they noticed that the child, if it was a boy, was sick, they would have rushed him to the hospital. But they were like, oh no, let's play it out, let's see what happens. And by the time she came to the clinic, it was too late. So that's when I realized, you know what, yes, the child did die from complications of being sick with malaria, but that really wasn't the underlying cause. The underlying cause was that, there's this whole, like, when we look at the gender issues, and just all of the fact that that woman wasn't empowered to bring her daughter to the hospital. And so I was at that point immediately. I was like, you know what? In as much as I really appreciate public health, social work is just as important. And so I started looking into the dual degree programs.
wow, that is powerful. Oh my gosh. That is so
Yeah.
powerful. Thank you for sharing that story. So what is like a master's in public health? I've heard of it, but I'm not really
Mhm.
understanding like what do you do? Like what does it focus
Mhm.
on?
Sure. So the cool thing about public health is that, so when I think of social work, with social work we have micro and macro. So I remember, or well, yeah, so in my program we were able to either specialize in clinical social work or macro social work. And so I like to think of public health as macro social work. There's a lot of overlap. So it's this idea that you're looking at the, rather than, a doctor, for example, or a nurse, might be looking or dealing with one specific client or one specific patient. Whereas a public health specialist, we're looking at the needs of a community. So we're looking at these health needs from a whole, at the population level. So you might work for a health department. So maybe you might notice that there, or even right now, I mean, I work for the CDC. I'm working as a global health fellow. Under normal circumstances, I'm supposed to be in Uganda, um, but I was evacuated back to the US, which is why I'm here in North Carolina. And so now I'm working on COVID work. So what does that mean? Well, oh my gosh, there's a high incidence of just COVID outbreak. And so we're trying to track down, figure out, well, where is their spread? And where there is spread, how are communities being affected by this? So, you can look at all these different factors. Whereas for me, as a public health social worker, what I'm most passionate about, are the social determinants of health that ultimately contribute to the well-being of a community. So, what I'm just I'm pretty much presenting like a very broad overview, but if you want a specific example, I focus a lot on mental health. Um, the mental health needs of a community. So, for example, in my program, when I was in my dual degree public health social work program, I had the great opportunity to work at a therapeutic nursery. I had under the supervision, the direct supervision of a senior social worker. So this social worker, she had developed this amazing play therapy tool for these infants within this therapeutic. Well, there were infants from ages 0 to 3 years of age, so infants and toddlers,
Mm.
and so the senior social worker, she was a social worker, so it's very clinical. All of the kids that had been exposed, the nursery was housed within a homeless shelter. So the kids had all been exposed to incessant forms of violence, and so they all had some sort of trauma-induced developmental delay. So I helped them to evaluate the play therapy interventions that they were using to determine whether or not the interventions were effective. So just trying to figure out, in addressing the needs of this overall population of homeless people who have kids that are just very exposed to all kinds of adverse experiences. Is this intervention effective, and can it be used at a larger scale? So just to provide a very concrete example.
That's fascinating. So you essentially are like evaluating her program to make sure that it's effective and also giving
Mm-hmm.
it validity too, because
Yeah.
she can come back and say, this has been proven by this study. Or is it considered like an official study? Okay.
Yes, thank you. Thank you. A key word, spot on. You've nailed it. We wanted to make sure that uh we really were testing the validity of the project, and it was a study, and we did have to get IRB approval through. So the cool thing was I was based at the university. I was a student at the University of Maryland, but the therapeutic nursery was actually a program um that was part of the Kennedy Krieger Institute. I don't know if you're familiar with it, but it's affiliated with Johns Hopkins. So I did have to get IRB approval. IRB approval stands for Institutional Review Board, and it's a board that ensures that the research that's being done, the evaluation that's being done, is indeed ethical and moral. And so I had to get approval from Johns Hopkins as well as from University of Maryland. And like you said, we were the end goal was to make sure that it could be used as an evidence-based tool
Mm,
for, yes, for social work clinicians.
that is fascinating. That is really
Yeah.
cool. I really like that. Awesome. So so you've done a lot of work with your master's in public health. And then I know that you've worked in Uganda. Have you done any other social work like experiences in addition to that?
Yes, I have. So when I was stateside prior to going global, I was very much involved in a lot of community organizing work. So the beauty and the privilege of being based in Baltimore City is that, yeah, there's just a whole lot of grassroots activities, organizing social justice activities happening on the ground. And it's interesting because, this week has been rough for all of America, because in addition to what all that has been happening with COVID, yeah, I don't know about for you, but for me, it's been tough emotionally with the unjust treatment that ultimately led to the death of George Floyd in Minneapolis. So when I was in Baltimore City, my second year in my program, that was actually the year that Freddie Gray in Baltimore City was murdered
Mm.
by the police. So there's just a lot. This is really what all is happening now. This was in 2015, but what all that's happening now, I have so like flashbacks to what all was happening in Baltimore City. Just really engaging in criminal justice reform, and then in addition to that, not to go off on a tangent, but to answer your original question, what other kind of social work activities have I been engaged in? I worked at a local high school in Baltimore City, in Curtis Bay, that actually was on the verge of being shut down. It was the only high school, which was crazy that they were considering shutting it down because there wasn't enough funding. It was the only high school in that particular neighborhood. Um, and they wanted to shut it down because, yes, there wasn't enough funding. Kids were dropping out. Things were just not going well. So there was a lot of organizing that came into play, and a lot of politicians, social workers, um, local community to get community members. We all came together. We were able to raise enough funding to keep this public school open. And within the public school, I'm sure everyone is familiar with United Way, a very large organization that focuses on providing all kinds of services. So we received funding, United Way, to create what we called, it was a family it was a family stability program. So it was called the United Way Family Stability Initiative. And so under this initiative, within this high school, we had a center that catered to the parents of the students at that school. So a lot of the parents, oh gosh, living in abject poverty, on the verge of losing their jobs, on the verge of being evicted from their homes, and that's where I came into play. It was my responsibility to meet with these parents, to sit down with them, to really adopt and use a strengths-based approach to and be their be their biggest advocate in working to ensure that they didn't get evicted, that they had access to various resources, community resources and tools that they needed to carry on and to truly be self-sufficient, while taking care of their children.
Wow. Yeah, that sounds like quite a job. So what ended up happening? Did was the school saved? Was it shut down?
Yeah, so it was saved and they're still going strong. And
Yay.
my understanding is that my supervisor is still working there all these years later. And yeah, so like I said, it was in Baltimore City, as you can imagine. And the reason why I brought up Freddie Grades, because he was a young guy, and uh it's interesting because a lot of the students that were at that high school, were dealing with, a lot of them were engaged in all kinds of violent activities, just like I said, in unjust, harsh conditions, and they were literally just trying to make ends meet. And so it really was all about meeting these beautiful community members where they were at, and you really adopting a strengths-based approach to get to the meat of the issues that they were dealing with and try to turn things around. So yes.
Mm-hmm. Wow, that must have been quite an experience. And now, this week. So as we're talking, it is May 29th. And this week, yeah. So George Floyd was was murdered by a police officer and in Minneapolis. And you're right. It has been very heavy for me because twofold. So one, there's been the chronic ongoing like stress of COVID-19. Like I've been dealing with it and coping with it, but there's still like a little bit of heaviness and that just like
Mm-hmm.
stress that's just there.
Mm-hmm.
And then you add on top of that a really traumatic event. People are circulating the video, and this entire conversation is coming up again, and it's like we have not made progress because this is happening. However,
Mm-hmm.
I do feel like there has been progress made. I feel like the Black Lives Matters movement has made a lot of progress. There is still work to be done, um but I do see progress happening and these conversations happening, and I see more people speaking out about it. But at the same time, I see the Black community is exhausted. They are so tired, and I feel like now the non-black allies such as myself, we're kind of like okay, like we want to help. This has been going on for so long. We know it's wrong. Like we don't like it. We hate it. Like but what do we do? What's the right thing to say? Like where do we even start? So um and then also too, like am I authorized to like say anything? Like
Mm-hmm.
who am I to to say something, or who am I to feel sad, or you know, just like who would listen to me? So it does really tie into to the imposter syndrome. Um
Mm-hmm.
you know, and so that's kind of what I wanted to talk about and to dive into today with you. Um and you've done a lot of work around imposter syndrome, right?
I have. So thank you so much for bringing it up. You're right. So I wear many hats, and so in as much as I do also, in as much as I am a public health social worker and I am engaged in a lot of social work and public health activities, I too am also a career strategist. And so it really is all about using the soft skills that we all of us workers have, and working with people to really truly build and gain that confidence so that they can grow professionally, personally, build their personal brand and their professional brand in such a way that they can elevate themselves and rise up. And just it really is all about ensuring that upward mobility. So I offer a range of services through my personal platform. I do a lot of resume reviews, CV reviews, a lot of coaching that focuses on, well, you know, how can I increase my confidence? How can I increase how can I, when it's time to negotiate for an offer, uh, what kind of negotiation skills do I need to adopt? And then also just how to manage work stress. It's not easy. Like, work can be very overwhelming. And so a lot of my social work training actually has been in mindfulness and just helping people to be mindful rather than having a mind that is full to the point where they just become so overwhelmed with anxiety. And so, like you mentioned, you were talking about imposter syndrome. And just to provide a little more context, I'm sure a lot of people who are listening to this podcast already know on Monday evening, Mr. George Floyd was killed by members of the Minneapolis Police Department. And it's been an incredibly long week for many of us and many of you that are listening. So,
Because oh,
as
sorry, I wanted to interject
go
because
ahead.
the police officer was kneeling on his neck to the point of
Mhm.
suffocation, and he ended up passing. Yes, go ahead.
Yes, thank you so much for adding that important piece. So yes, things are very tense in that community right now around the city of Minneapolis and St. Paul, the Twin Cities. So I'm mainly just sharing this information on this platform. Thank you again, Catherine, for even allowing me to have the voice to share. But just sharing because you know this is social work. And uh a lot of us, you might find that your clients, they might feel overwhelmed, just so many different emotions, exhausted, frustrated. Yes. And so even for me, like while I'm currently in a place where I'm just like I'm feeling the I'm feeling the urge to be proactive. Um, One thing that I have chosen to do via my various platforms is to share resources, and I'm happy to share those links with you, Catherine. But share resources for people who are also feeling very proactive. So on my Instagram, interestingly enough, I shared a post yesterday on Instagram, um, just basically listing 7 things for really anyone who feels the need to support this never-ending fight against racism, police brutality, and honestly, just any form of social injustice, because this really does cut across many different layers.
Mhm.
So whatever you feel most connected to, whichever fight that you feel like joining as a social worker, um, yes, I can just briefly list it off. So
Yeah.
number
Wait,
one,
wait,
I
wait.
said,
I want to get to that at the
oh, go
end.
ahead. Mm-hmm.
So
Sure.
I want to talk about kind of what is going on right now. So
Mm-hmm.
and then and like what do you see? So I'm not really like in the Black community. Well, I'm
Mm-hmm.
so okay. Let me back up.
Mm-hmm.
My position. So I am not Black. However, I have had just a lot of personal dynamics and interactions. So, my husband is Black, and we are very, very close with his family. And my daughter is half Black and half white. And, well, I'm white and Hispanic, but for this purposes, we'll just go with white. So, and then my father, he is. We had a strained relationship, and he identified with the Aryan race theory. So basically, the belief that white people are genetically superior to other races. He was a very big Hitler fan, and so obviously, like, that was a barrier for us having any sort of relationship in my adult life, and so he was never involved, like, with my family. He did not support the marriage. He never met his grandchild. The first time she saw him was at his funeral, unfortunately.
Wow.
Yeah. So racism is very personal to me, and I have a privilege of being in the position that I see it from different angles. So there's me, like, I know how people treat me when I go out into public, versus I when we go out into the same places with my husband and his family. And there are differences. There's differences in the way that people respond and how we are treated, in the customer service that we receive or don't receive, and in the amount of times that we are pulled over by the police officers. There's a significant difference. And so, that's just a little bit about me and why I'm so passionate and why I feel strongly, with the Black community, because I'm part of it. And it's like, I don't know if I'm allowed, like, quote, allowed to, like, say that, but I mean, my daughter is half Black, and you mess with my daughter, you mess with me. So, and she's 3, so I just worry about her future, and I have so many, family members and friends that I worry about too, and they have conversations with their children that I never had as a white individual. Like my husband, he would tell me, like, oh, we've learned from a young age how to respond to police officers and to be extra careful, like, as opposed to other people. Like, I see them, like, such blatant disrespect, and like my husband, like, I don't know, it's just so different. So that just is, like, a little bit of context about me and my personal life.
That's intense. Thank you so much for sharing. That's not easy. That's hard. It's difficult. And like you said, it is very personal for you. Because at the end of the day, like you mentioned, you mess with if anyone tries to mess with your daughter, they're ultimately messing with you. And it's your role as a mother, and your husband's role to ensure that your daughter is safe at all times. And sometimes it might feel overwhelming, like, you might not feel as empowered to do that if you're dealing with all these negative and evil forces in society, whether it's structural racism or individual racism. So thank you so much for sharing.
Yeah, so I wanted to just put this out there because I am struggling with imposter syndrome right now in regards to this specific topic, and I see a lot of people, in the non-Black community who are also, like, wondering, like, what do we do? How do we help? We don't like this. This is awful. Like, but, like, who am I to say anything? So can you, like, first, what is imposter syndrome?
Sure. It's Thank you so much for that question. It's funny because today I saw something on Instagram and I was like, wow, this is such a great visual. It was something along the lines of imposter syndrome is a temporary lapse in your memory of who you are and your true abilities. So it's this idea that you might find yourself, maybe there's a director role that you see um that you really want to apply for, and you're like, wait, I totally could qualify, but then maybe 5-10 minutes later, you're really truly reflecting, you're thinking about it, and you're like, nah, like I've never actually truly been a leader. But then it's just this idea that um it's this persistent inability to believe in that your success is deserved and that you've legitimately achieved all that you've acquired as a result of your own efforts or skills. So people who suffer from imposter syndrome, they may be at increased risk of anxiety. Um and so that's what that is. And you mentioned that you've been feeling very overwhelmed, like, oh, like you don't know how you can get involved or how you can engage. And there are so many ways to get engaged. So like, if I'm happy to share, if you'd like for me to share. I don't know if you had any other questions.
Yeah, I do actually. I have a lot of questions.
Sure.
So specifically with imposter syndrome, like who who do you see is affected by it the most, and how does that show up for us? Like what are some ways that people might be able to identify this?
Mm-hmm. Sure. So who is affected by it the most? Well, it really is an issue of self-esteem and self-confidence. I'm just thinking about it's funny because a lot of people look at me and they're like, Chi Chi, you're just always so confident. Like, how do you do it? Like, you just always come across as confident. And in as much as I may, like, on the outside come across as confident, I cannot lie and say that there haven't been moments when I felt like, oh my gosh, like I probably don't qualify for this, or I'm probably not good enough. And so um you know based on what the research the little research that I've done and the studies that I've come across, um I think that you find that a lot of, well, it definitely affects obviously both men, women. Um, but I will say that notice a large prevalence of it amongst high achieving women. And why is that? It's because we as women, we wear many different hats, many different roles. We oftentimes find ourselves in this situation. We might apply for a job, and our male counterpart, well, there are statistics that show that our male counterparts, you know, oftentimes earn twice as much amount of money as we may. They might be offered twice as much amount in the form of a salary, you know uh or we're just always finding ourselves in situations where we're undermined, undercut, despite the fact that we do have the ability to multitask. Studies have shown that we as women have the ability to make decisions that are in the best interest of the people that we are trying to serve. We are very responsible. And yes, I am generalizing a lot. But you know, I just say this to say that I'm just thinking about social work,
Mm-hmm.
and how this really does tie into we as social workers. We know that a large proportion of social workers are women. And then I'm just thinking about how when I was in social work school, I remember the last week when I was graduating, I attended a seminar that focused on um, really just giving us information of how do we transition out of this space as a grad student and enter into the workforce. And so, as you can imagine, there were we across all the different students. Some of us came in already having a couple of years of work experience. Some of us came in directly straight out of undergrad. Some of us, it doesn't matter. Like the reality was that most of us had concrete, by the time we graduated, we all had some form of concrete social work experience, as well as the training, because we all get placed in, we all have field
Mm-hmm.
placements. And so it's very easy to feel like, oh, well, especially when we think about the narrative of, oh, social workers were always willing to bear the brunt of just having to deal with being underpaid and being not earning a high enough salary. And so that's where this comes into play. So yeah, I hope that I've answered your question. Like, I mean, there's a lot to unpack there.
Definitely. Do you feel like there is, or do you know if there is a cause, or you mentioned that it kind of is a combination of a lack of confidence in yourself. Do you feel like that is a really big like root cause of it?
Absolutely. So based on the work, and I'd be happy to do even more research because what you're asking is actually a very good question, and I'm curious to know if are studies that have been done on this. But I know that just from reading different news sources, I've seen that different researchers and people who have offered insight on this have determined that the women um, these high achieving women who tend to experience imposter syndrome, they show a lot of symptoms related to depression, generalized anxiety, and low self
Mm,
confidence. And so, you know, perhaps if growing up, you were always that person who didn't necessarily believe in your true abilities. um Even if you do, I mean, I'm just thinking of like all the people that I've come across and that do have low self-esteem, and it's crazy because they're far more talented in many different things than I
mhm,
am. And so yes, to answer your question, it definitely, the mental framework for imposter syndrome has developed from various factors such as gender stereotypes. A lot of that could be just maybe your upbringing. So like, growing up, did you have parents? I'm Nigerian. So for me, culturally, I mean, we have thick skin, we're tough, but I'm not gonna lie. There were a lot of instances where, our parents would be like, "Oh my gosh, you're a goat. You're you're a goat. You're silly. You're this. You're
uh-huh.
that," and that can take a toll on us.
Sure. Yeah, because then you begin
Um,
to identify and self-identify as that. Have you seen it? I'm kind of curious. Have you seen have you seen imposter syndrome present itself in different cultures differently, like Americans or Nigerians, or just kind of being like around the world? Have you noticed any differences in the cultures?
Absolutely. So I would say that we as Americans, we are just, and of course this may vary from race to race, and I can just imagine that in making this comment, many different people probably a whole debate could ensue out of what I'm about to say. But I was gonna say that in general, I'm thinking about growing up in a Nigerian household. Of course, what took place in the home is very different from what took place in school. So in school, growing up, we were always challenged to be very critical thinkers. I'm just thinking of several instances where my teachers would be like, "It's okay to raise your hand and say that you don't agree with what I, the teacher, am
Mm,
saying." And as a matter of fact, I would love to hear people who were willing to play devil's advocate. We were always encouraged to challenge our teachers, whereas in some of the countries that I've lived in, that's not a thing. How dare you open your mouth and challenge the teacher? That's seen as a sign of disrespect. And so, you know, in a way, it can kind of be oppressive and suppress one's ability to truly, express themselves or display this high level of confidence, because maybe displaying a high level of confidence in some societies may come across as being overly arrogant or not being humble. So to answer your question, yes, absolutely, I do think culture plays a huge role.
that makes sense because I was never, like, once in my life told to challenge a teacher. Um, and I can definitely see how that plays a role because if you are encouraged to critically think and that it's okay to have your own opinion in, like, even with someone who is an authority figure, like that would increase your almost your self-worth, right? Or like, yeah, I do have my own opinion and that's okay. As opposed to like the way I was raised, here in California that like you respect authority and they know better than you do. So you just need to like
Yes.
stay in your place and do what you're told, and you'll be fine. Which
Mm-hmm.
that's like makes for a easy like teaching experience, right? But it doesn't necessarily create critical thinkers as adults or people who are willing to explore, or people who are willing to take chances. So that really makes a lot of sense.
Absolutely. And then, I just also wanted to add, as a person of color, as a Black woman, that it's interesting because in school, of course, I miss school because I miss reading many different books that share different theories. And I'm just thinking about a professor. I forgot which school she's affiliated with, but her name is Dr. Degree. I think her name is Dr. Joy Degree, and she had 12 years of both quantitative and qualitative research that ultimately led to the development of her theory of what's called post-traumatic slave syndrome. Now, for me, like, I'm very privileged. So my parents immigrated. They immigrated from Nigeria. And so I can't trace my ancestry back to um, you know, the days of slavery. But I will say that in watching and reading some of her work, she talks about this theory that talks about, the etiology of um the adaptive survival behaviors in African American communities throughout the United States and the diaspora. And she talks about how it's a condition that exists as a consequence of just like consistent and multi generational oppression of Africans and their descendants, resulting from the years of slavery and then subsequently just like this idea that goes back to what you initially brought up, this idea or this belief that African Americans were inherently or genetically inferior to whites, and so which led to institutionalized racism. And so I will say that that has been instrumental. It's been huge in ultimately leading to this decrease in self-esteem. There's a lot of feelings of hopelessness and depression and just general self-destructive outlook amongst a lot of African Americans and their communities. And it's not easy. It's not easy. There's even me myself, like even though I can't necessarily like I can't say that this is my history, just as an outsider, like I'm stuck suffering from, what do they call it, like secondary exposure to like it's like secondary PTSD.
Yeah,
It's like it's
vicarious
not
trauma.
vicarious trauma. Thank you. I mean, yes, like I get angry
Hmm.
when I think about it. And there is this marked propensity for like anger and violence, and I can't imagine that, when you're constantly there's just something so paralyzing about this trauma that could ultimately lead to imposter syndrome and this feeling of like not feeling worthy or strong enough to go for whatever your goals are, or believing your own ability to achieve, your dreams. So yeah.
Hmm. And we actually did an entire episode on imposter syndrome. If you guys haven't listened to it, go back and listen to it.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, so thank you for sharing all of that. And I do want to get into like what we can do, because um there's a lot of there's a lot of work that needs to be done. And I feel like the Black community is tired. There is a lot of trauma. I mean, I admit I could not watch the video of, that came
Yeah.
out. I couldn't watch it. I've watched a lot of other videos, and when I saw like I can't breathe, the quote on wherever, where like Instagram or whatever, I was like, "Oh my gosh, is this happening again? Is this like an anniversary? Like what what is going on?" And it brought me back to the original time when the other Black gentleman was suffocated. And
Hmm.
and I just can't, and that's okay. I feel guilt around not watching the video, but then at the same time I know that it's what I have to do for my own mental health and my own like my own boundaries to protect myself from getting more vicarious trauma. Like we don't have to watch the video to know that it happened. um and I'm sure people like feel differently about that. Like I've heard some people say, you know, it's the least we could do, or they deserve to have their story out there, or you know, whatever it is. But I feel like whatever you feel is best for you, then you do that. We each are in a different place, you know, personally, mentally, psychologically, physically. So you have to be your own judge on what you can mentally handle at any given moment, and it's okay to have those boundaries.
Absolutely.
So with that said, I know that there are a lot of people who want to help, because there's a lot of misconceptions out there. There's a lot of people who feel like us having this conversation, that Black Lives Matters movement, they feel like it is inconvenient. They feel like it is annoying. They feel like this conversation should be over. They feel like the media is playing it up and blowing it way out of proportion, or that Black Lives Matter movement is trying to play the victim card, and like just playing victim and not being an advocate. So, you know, I don't agree with those. And I feel like there is a lot of education and self awareness that people need to do on their own. But like, what can I do kind of as a non-black ally to help that can be more effective, that can just like show my support and just move, like continue this conversation and continue with this, like moving this movement forward.
Absolutely. This is a such a powerful question for me, and I'm happy to share because that's what I do. I'm a resource connector. So yes, there's a lot that can be done. You know, you first and foremost, and it seems like you've already done this, and because it's very, it's personal for you, but you can educate yourself on what is truly going on. It doesn't mean that you have to go and watch very toxic videos, because self-care is important and mental health is important, and we want to make sure that we are in a position where we can truly ultimately contribute to the impact and the betterment of these communities. But it really is all about celebrating fake news, sorry, not celebrating, separating separating fake news from facts. um yeah, separating fake news from facts, reconstructing one's beliefs and habits. I mean, go you. It's not easy. When I think about as someone who has a background in early childhood development, a lot of people, their beliefs are constructed based off of just their upbringing, and what a lot of people tend to believe, what their parents believe, until they get to a point where it's like, okay, like I'm going to learn for myself. I'm going to dig deep for the truth. And sometimes it even results in having to unlearn to relearn. And so, really doing the research, reconstructing your beliefs and your habits, building connections with like-minded folks. There's lots of organizing and activism taking place even within your own community. It doesn't matter where you are in the world. I mean, look at what's happening in Los Angeles and other parts of the United States of America. People are mobilizing themselves. And so get involved, attend open meetings, take action by going to these meetings. And if for some people who feel the need to protest, I know the word protest and demonstration, it has a very negative connotation. We think violence. Protesting doesn't necessarily have to be a violent thing. It's a great way. It's a great way to practice active resistance, and you can protest in a peaceful manner. You can protest through public speaking. Lead the way, especially if you're great with public speaking. Get into those spaces and share your voice with people. Practice your activism, post articles, use social media. And then last but not least, if you feel like you can't become engaged in those ways, you can always donate. You can donate to an impactful organization. And I share this on my platform. I have a list of organizations on my platform, and you can become a paid member of an organization or give a small monthly gift or send in a lump sum donation towards the social justice movement. So there are many different ways to get engaged.
Thank you. Thank you for that. And it was kind of like, I had a reaction when you said protest, that given the violent responses that have been to protests, I'm like, I don't know about me going, like, taking my daughter to a protest. But I did
Yeah.
like that you also included other ways instead of like going to an actual event where people might be concerned about their safety, that they can write letters, send it to newspapers,
Yeah.
write blogs, do things like have a podcast. You could do,
Yeah.
there's so many other things that don't get you out there. Oh, and with COVID on top of that. Um, yeah. So I like all those ways. And you mentioned your platform. Where can people find you and connect with you and get more information?
Absolutely. So for people who are more so, well, on Instagram, you can find me. My Instagram name is Afropreneur Chi. And so it's kind of like entrepreneur, but Afropreneur, Afropreneur, Chi. And yeah, so you can find me on Instagram at Afropreneur Chi. I do have two different websites. So if you're just more so interested in professional development, my resume writing services, and those services that I offer, you can find me on www.sproutly.online. Sproutly is spelled Sproutly, www.sproutly.online. And if you're more so interested in the work that I'm doing, the social activism, social justice work that I'm doing, I also failed to mention that I do have a funding database. There are lots of people who are go-getters, they're proactive, they're innovators. And for people who want to embrace their creativity or, um, you know, activate their leadership skills in a proactive way, feel free to go to my website. It's www.afropreneurchi.com. And there is a funding database. And on that funding database, I do share various funding opportunities that are updated on a regular basis for people who are looking for the funding or the grants that they need to carry out whatever projects they want to work
Wow,
on.
that's awesome. I'm gonna go check that out.
Yeah, thank
And I'm
you.
going to have all of these links in the show notes. So don't worry if you're like driving or something and you can't write this down. Um, all of that will be on there. And thank you. Thank you so much. Is there anything that you wanted to add that we didn't cover?
No, if anything, I just wanted to uh maybe close it out. I mean, we as social workers, it's so easy to get burnt, to suffer from burnout. Um, so many emotions to deal with. So I just want to close out with an affirmation that I like to tell myself in an effort to avoid imposter syndrome. And I encourage you all who are listening and who are tuned in to say it to yourself in front of the mirror on a regular basis. The affirmation is, I believe in myself, take risks, and follow through on my ideas as I'm striving to be the best person, to be the best version of myself.
I love that. Love it. Thank you so much, Chi Chi. It was so good to talk to you today.
Likewise, thank you so much for having me. And yeah, all the best.
Awesome. Thank you so much. You take care. Thank you so much for listening to another episode of Social Workers Rise. If you loved it, write a review and give us 5 stars wherever you listen to your podcast. This just helps other people just like you find us and join our community. Also, I would love to connect with you on Instagram. You can find me at Social Workers Rise. I can't wait to see you next week. Bye.